Good afternoon, teacher. We will present a timeline about the Ecuadorian education history and some curricular changes that have.
I talk about the education of the 15th century, the period occurring in the Middle Age, and the stage, the church was the chair of the educations, also the Republic institutions during the Republic in 1822. Ecuador was independent from the Spain rule in the integrated into the Great Colombia. The pedagogical trend there with to the models of the basic institutions. In the period of the first letter, the learning different disciplines such as grammar, reading, Latin, calligraphy, and arithmetic was addressed. In university education, the aim was to train officials for the state and the church. The education alternative. Education being a means for social advancement, the first futures of humanist educations date from the late 15th century were intellectual light and the new pedagogical model that combined the Christian wisdom with Greco-Romano culture in detect. And the present author is Lorenzo Valla and Christian Witz. Thank you.
Then we have the 16th century. In this part, some important aspects that occurred during the Spanish colonization. During this period, the formal education took place in Ecuador. It was directed by religious orders, particularly the Franciscans and Dominicans and the Augustinians. Then the education expanded with the establishment of more schools. The curriculum expanded with instruction in Latin grammar, rhetoric, and basic arithmetic. Also, it's important that I mentioned that schools were established to provide education for children of the Spanish colonies, including subjects such as the humanities, philosophy, and theology. Then we have the pedagogical trends. The first pedagogical trend is religious instruction. In this part is the education focus on religious teaching and the Spanish language. The following is the humanistic education, the study of a classical language, literature, and philosophy was emphasized. And the educational alternatives, we have the Franciscan, Dominican, and Augustinian school. They are reading, writing, and Christian doctrine. And also the Jesuit College. Its curriculum includes classical language, humanities, mathematics, and natural science. And the most representative authors, they are Fray Gaspar de Villarroel and José de Acosta. Thank you.
Okay, then we have the 17th century. It is considered a Spanish colonial area. And in this stage occurred an expansion of education. Here we have some pedagogical trends that are the dominance of religion, education, and the influence of scholasticism. And also we have some educational alternatives that the education for indigenous people was limited. And also the some representative authors that we have here is the Padre San Francisco de Morales and also the Padres Franciscanos.
Okay, in the 18th century, we have the period like 1835 and 1879. This stage comprises the traditional 8th century. This period was characterized by limited access to education, with education primarily reserved for the upper classes, and in particular the Spanish elite. The next is the continue or the beginning of the century. During this time, there was a gradual shift towards broader access to education. The Spanish crown implement educational reform known as Borbonic reforms. In the pedagogical trend, we have the traditional religious education. In the early 18th century, education was primarily centered around religious teachings, focusing on Catholic doctrine, prayers, and moral values. The other is the mentor teaching pedagogy. This rise with the Enlightenment ideas at the late of 18th century. There was a growing emphasis on reason, critical thinking, and acquisition of language. This pedagogy aimed to produce well-rounded individuals capable for contributing to the society. The another is the educational alternatives. We have two, the Jesuit schools. This was played a significant role in education, particularly for the elite. And this school was focused on religious education, but also provide instruction in humanities and science. The royal schools, as part of the Borbonic reforms, the Spanish crown established royal schools throughout Ecuador, and these schools provide primary education to a broader population and were obtained by priests or lay people. The most representative authors in this century was Juan de Velasco and Eugenio Espejo.
Well, now I am going to talk about 19th century. We have the period from 1822 to 1896. Second, we have the stages. In the stages include independence and nation building, consolidation and reforms, and modernization and progress. Then we have the pedagogical trends. In the year 1832, we have the founding of the Central University of Ecuador in Quito. Then in the year 1843, the President Vicente Rocafuerte implements a series of reforms in the educational system. And also we have in the year 1822, process of nation building that includes the establishment of an educational system of its own. And finally, in the year 1871, Gabriel Garcia Moreno carries out important reforms in the education sphere. Then we have the educational alternatives. In this, I include in the 1822, a process of national construction beings. In the year 1830, the basis for the development of educational policies at the national level are established. And finally, in the year 1896, the President Eloy Alfaro promotes a series of educational reforms. And finally, we have the most representative authors are Eloy Alfaro, Gabriel Garcia Moreno, and Vicente Rocafuerte. Thank you.
Well, Ecuadorian education has undergone significant changes throughout the 20th century. For example, in the period 1900, for example, in the stage early 20th century education in Ecuadorian, for example, start the traditional teaching methods, emphasis on memorization, the teacher centering instructions, and for example, the limitation availability of alternatives or private schools. And for example, in other period that was in 1930, for example, start the modernization education reforms. That is well, the pedagogical trend was introduction of progressive education methods focused on experimental learning and student-centered approach. Then we have, for example, the growth of private schools with alternative education models, for example, Montessori. And then we have other period that was 1960, that was in this part was the decentralization and curricular diversification. For example, in this part, the start was expansion of access to education, modernization of curricular vocalization training and other programs. And in this part, start other types of educational alternatives that was emerging of specialized schools, for example, technical schools, art schools, and in other periods. Well, to end, in 1990, finally the educational reforms and technological integration. In this period started other type of pedagogical trend that was integration of technical in education, competence-based in education, and inclusive education. And to end in this part, start other alternatives in education that was online education platforms, homeschooling, project-based learning schools, and that's all.
Okay, now we talk about the 21st century. This period is considered as the contemporary era, and we have some stage 2000, 2010, 2013, and 2017. And in this period, we have some pedagogical trends that were student-centered learning, in which students develop the emphasis on active students' participation and also develop critical thinking and problem solving. In experimental learning, in which they incorporate hands-on activities, projects, and real-life experiences to engage learning outcomes, and inclusive and intercultural. It promotes the diversity, the perspective for different culture, and addressing the needs of diverse learners. And also we have implementation in educational alternatives. Here we have the implementation of specific educational programs, such as Bachillerato Internacional and Bachillerato General Unificado. The main representative of this period is Rafael Correa. And as additional data, in 2008 appeared the implementation of the Plan Nacional of Buen Vivir. And that's all.